Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for your patience in letting us get this organized. There will be a few people who are joining us over the next couple of minutes, and then all of our events are starting. We're incredibly excited. So my name is Ronna Brown. I'm the president of Philanthropy New York, and I want to welcome all of you to our 35th annual meeting. Thank you. Some of you have been with us since 1 o'clock for the business meeting. Others of you joined us for the workshops that were the last hour, and some of you are just coming in now. We're also being joined by folks on the live stream. So to all of you, welcome. And once again, we want to thank the Ford Foundation for their incredible generosity in hosting today's meeting. I have the privilege of starting us off for the next portion of the day, what we are calling our rapid fire talks. We have 3 amazing leaders who are going to be up here shortly: Anu Bhagwati, Farhana, Khera, and Janet Mock. I'm going to let our moderator tell you some about each one of them, but I get to talk to you about our moderator. Rick Smith is the president of the Pinkerton Foundation. Prior to taking that position, he was the chair and editor-in-chief of Newsweek magazine. He is a board member at the Columbia Journalism School, and he has a whole slew of awards and honors, and if you go to your program, you'll see only a portion of them there. But I think what's most important in terms of today is that Rick is a keen listener and a very thoughtful observer. So what we have asked him to do is to introduce each of our speakers, who will be up here for about 10 minutes, and then conduct a panel conversation, really pulling out some of the themes and conflicts in the conversations that you all will just have heard from them. What I'm confident of is that our speakers today are going to expand our minds on the topics that they're touching, and I suspect, in addition to that, they're going to touch our hearts as well. So we are really looking forward to that. We have also given Rick the task of introducing the next segment of the day when his panel conversation is concluded by starting us off introducing the president of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker. So I'd like to ask you now to help me welcome Rick to come up here and take us forward to the next section.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronna, for that very, very generous introduction. After a warm and wonderful intro like that, I usually quote Abraham Lincoln, who once said, "Don't take the time to deny it. The audience will learn the truth for themselves." But the one thing I'm sure of today is that you're not here to hear me talk a lot. So I think it's time to move on very quickly with our extraordinary panel of leaders: Farhana, Khera, Anu Bhagwati, and Janet Mock. I will very briefly introduce each one, but their backstories are all truly compelling, and I strongly encourage you to take a look at the lengthier bios in the program. First up today will be Farhana Khera. Farhana is the president and executive director of Muslim Advocates, a national legal advocacy and educational organization. Founded by Ms. Khera and a group of American Muslim lawyers and policy experts, Muslim Advocates works on the front lines of civil rights to protect freedom for Americans of all faiths. Farhana, the stage is yours. Oh.
Thank you, Rick, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I was born and raised in a small town in upstate New York called Painted Post. Population 2,000. Yes, that's its real name. Our neighbors in the tightly knit community in which I was raised were mostly white, mostly Christian, and mostly conservative. One of my fondest memories as a child was spending an evening after school with my mother in our kitchen, making one of my favorite Pakistani sweets, jalebis. Now, if you haven't had one before, they're delicious. They're bright orange, pretzel-shaped, and super sweet. I was so excited to bring a batch of these jalebis to school with me the next day to share with my classmates. And as I watched them dig into the batch of jalebis, I was so excited to see that my classmates were enjoying this delectable sweet as much as I did, and were taking great interest in my family and my culture. You see, in the America I grew up in, differences were shared, embraced, and even celebrated. And my family and I had the freedom to practice our faith. So much has changed since then. On September 11th, 2001, I was working for US Senator Russ Feingold, advising him on civil rights issues facing our country. For those of us who were in New York City and Washington, D.C. that fateful day, we have memories that will be with us for the rest of our lives. There was so much fear. Fear for the safety of our nation and fear for the safety of our loved ones. One vivid memory I have is later that same day, that evening, I heard about an American Muslim woman who was wearing hijab, or the headscarf, who was almost run down in a grocery store parking lot in Long Island. In the days and weeks later, I would hear Muslim women who wear hijab, including some people I knew, who would have very serious conversations about whether they should simply remove their headscarves to ensure their personal safety. The Bush administration and Congress, of course, were quick to respond to the attacks and introduced the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act would not only expand law enforcement and intelligence gathering, but would erode core Fourth Amendment protections. The political pressures were so great that members of Congress were eager, felt the pressure to just do something. And they were willing to throw away the Bill of Rights, even though each of them had sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. There was nearly unanimous support in the United States Senate, but there was one senator who did not go along, and that was Senator Feingold. If you can just imagine the amount of political courage it took to stand up in those weeks and days after September 11th, his courage inspires me deeply to this day. In the months and years later, I would be an eyewitness to other bad laws and policies that would be developed and implemented, all without an American Muslim voice at the table. And so I left Capitol Hill, and with a group of friends and colleagues who were lawyers and policy experts like me, we started Muslim Advocates, an organization focused on protecting freedoms for Americans of all faith. We do our work by advocating with officials at the highest level of government. We litigate with strategic, high-impact lawsuits, and we educate and empower the American Muslim community. Now, as you can imagine, the challenges have been many, but the last few years in particular seem to be especially difficult and harrowing times for the American Muslim community. In 2010, Pam Geller, an anti-Muslim activist and blogger, led a series of protests and demonstrations right here in New York to oppose the proposed construction of a community center in Lower Manhattan. Her demonstration sparked almost wall-to-wall, 24/7 news coverage. Later that year, Congressman Peter King would announce that he would hold hearings on the, quote, the radicalization of the American Muslim community, unquote. In other words, code words for fanning the flames of fear. And in 2011, as a result of news reports by the Associated Press, we would learn that the New York Police Department was spying on innocent Muslims who were simply going about their daily lives, going to the mosque, going to school, going to the store, simply because they were Muslim. It was discrimination, plain and simple. Hate rallies, political witch hunts, discriminatory policing. Together, these activities send a message to the American people that Muslims should be feared. In fact, it's not surprising then that during the same time, according to the FBI's own statistics, hate crimes have skyrocketed and have been at nearly 50% increased since their prior levels. So what can we do? You know, it's almost understandably at some level human instinct that when you're under attack, to recoil, to duck, to hide. But at Muslim Advocates, we understand that to fight fear and discrimination, you have to stay engaged. You have to reach across and understand the differences. And you have to stand up tall for what is right. And as the saying goes, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. And that is why in 2009, when the Human Rights Campaign reached out and asked us to support federal legislation that would prohibit employment discrimination against the LGBT community, we said yes, becoming the first Muslim organization to stand tall on this issue. You can imagine our delight then when 2 years later, the LGBT community responded in kind. PFLAG National, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force Action Fund, all came out strongly condemning the Peter King hearings and calling them for what they were, an ugly, un-American witch hunt. We've also partnered with the Anti-Defamation League, the Sikh Coalition, the Interfaith Alliance, dozens and dozens of faith, civil rights, civic organizations to address the troubling rise in religion-based hate crimes. You see, we understand that intolerance and hate is directed not only at Muslims, but also Jews and Sikhs. And when we learned about the NYPD spying program, we knew we could not fight this fight alone. As we were preparing our lawsuit and other legal actions against the NYPD, we reached out again and put together a group of over 100 civil rights, civic, and faith organizations who joined with us in our calls on the Attorneys General of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the United States, calling for an investigation of the New York Police Department for its discriminatory policing program. Now, these are great examples of what we do at Muslim Advocates and what it means to actually band together with your friends and your allies to stand tall against injustice. You know, when I'm in meetings with allies or in a coalition meeting, I often think back to my time as a child and sharing those jalebis and remembering what it means to actually reach across our differences and find common ground. So while the challenges have been many, there have been signs of hope. You may have heard on April 15th, the New York Police Department announced, sorry, went the wrong way there. Can't get enough of the jalebis. The New York Police Department announced that it had disbanded the Muslim spying unit. Now, this step forward would not have been possible if we had not taken legal action and a coalition of dozens and dozens of groups and Americans had not lifted their voices. And while we certainly relish this step forward, we know that our work is not yet done. We are continuing to keep up the pressure on the New York Police Department until they clearly and definitively say that they will no longer send undercover cops and informants to spy on innocent Muslims. While the challenges are many, I have hope. I have hope because I know that at the core of who we are as Americans is that we don't treat each other differently based on how we look or how we pray. We are at our best, we are at our strongest when we come together with our shared values and we're not divided by our differences. I look forward to creating a future where families can go to the mosque and not be viewed with suspicion, where a woman wearing hijab can go about her daily life, going to the grocery store, picking up her kids, going to work without fear of being attacked. And in America where a school child does not have to fear being bullied and instead can share her differences and perhaps even forge a friendship based on a mutual love of sweets. That is the America I know we can be. If my last 9 years as being executive director of Muslim Advocates have taught me anything, it is this, that we can't do this alone. We need all Americans of goodwill coming together, working together to create a better future for each of us. I hope you will join us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Farhana. That was terrific, moving, and thought-provoking. Our next speaker is Anu Bhagwati. Anu is the executive director and co-founder of the Service Women's Action Network, also known as SWAN. A former captain and company commander, Anu served as a U.S. Marine officer from 1999 to 2004. Under Anu's leadership, SWAN has spearheaded national policy reform, legislation and litigation to end military rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and to eliminate all barriers to equal opportunity for service women. Please welcome Anu Bhagwati.
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work at SWAN, but I wanted to start by telling you more about myself and my personal journey. And my journey, my story really starts with my family's story, and in particular, my mother's story. And this is my mother. My parents are immigrants from India, and when I was growing up as a child in New York City, I could palpably feel that my mother had been through something in her past that I didn't know about. I felt her pain. I don't know if this is something common between mothers and daughters or parents and children, but I wanted to protect her. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to help her. I wanted to make it all better. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that my mother took me aside and she explained to me that she had been married before, that her first husband in India was very abusive, and that she was caught in this relationship that she ended up fleeing from. She fled the marriage. She converted to Christianity because Hindu law would not allow her a divorce at that time. She fled to the United States. She left her family behind in India. She felt small and worthless. She felt that Indian society had cast her out. And so she was carrying all of this with her for decades. She was unable to conceive a child for years because of the abuse. And so when I was born, I was like some kind of miracle child. And I didn't really know any of this. I didn't understand any of this. My father has a different story, but he was a huge personality, still is a huge personality. He was very domineering, and I felt like that was just way too much pressure for one person to handle. Because my mother had me so late, I had no brothers and sisters to sort of process any of this with. And so when I was in my early 20s, I completed my rebellion and I joined the military, which is not what good Indian girls do, in case you were wondering. This is me with a group of Marines, mostly infantry guys. I volunteered. I was the second woman volunteer to do a close combat martial arts black belt training program in the Marine Corps when they finally opened up that, among dozens of other programs that are still off limits to women, but they finally opened that one up, and I dove in for that one. It was so exciting. And this is us in a mud pit filled with pepper spray, so it was a good time. The Marine Corps was a shock for me. I had no idea what I was getting into. I in retrospect, I had replaced one familial patriarch with an institutional patriarch, right? But this institutional patriarch was extremely violent, extremely aggressive, and not good for my health in any way. But I loved it. I loved it, and I sucked it up for 5 years. I faced daily harassment. I witnessed daily harassment. I was exposed to horrible things that I wouldn't want to share with anybody, but I ended up sharing it really with the world over time. I was in Thailand for 3 months, for example, on a deployment, and witnessing thousands of my fellow Marines and sailors sexually exploiting the women and girls of Thailand. This is something that still I carry with me like a burden. I haven't processed it. How do you process that? I was in uniform too, right? These are the kinds of things that happen in the background, even though they're happening on such a large scale, we haven't even begun to understand what that means as a country. And when I was in my final unit, I was a company commander in charge of 450 Marines, teaching them combat skills, sending them off to Iraq and Afghanistan after that, hopefully with the skills to survive. And an officer in my unit was sexually harassing all the women, and it was mostly male unit. It was an infantry environment. And so I decided to do what any person with any ounce of self-preservation would not have done, which is commit career suicide. And I said, my mother did not raise me to put up with this bullshit. And so I not only raised a stink, I raised it through my chain of command, but when they, as you may have heard in the news, squashed that complaint and swept it under the rug, I went outside the chain and filed an independent investigation. And this ended my career. I got out with an honorable discharge, but I was really traumatized. I had seen and witnessed so much at that point, held it down like good Marines do, but it all came to the surface after I left. And so our work really grew out of the common experiences of betrayal and trauma and harassment of women in uniform. It was a collective effort to help heal our community. And nobody had ever done this before. Nobody had named these discriminations and abuses and called it rape and called it harassment and called it assault and called it discrimination and never said sorry for it, right? And so we did that. These issues are really mainstream now. I mean, it's remarkable. It's a huge success. But 5 years ago, the folks who are taking these issues on today didn't care. I mean, they considered these issues just a huge political liability, even the well-known ones who are in the news today. This is the type of culture that still exists in the military, but this is my favorite poster of all the posters that have come out of the military. It's Ask Her When She's Sober, and we raised such a stink about this one. Preventing sexual assault is part of my duty. So the military is really, I would argue, about 25 years behind where the rest of our country is in terms of sexual assault understanding, rape culture, rape mythology understanding, still conflates alcohol awareness with rape awareness. Alcohol is not a tool of the predator, it's just some random factor in an assault. This next one, you can avoid becoming a victim. This is as recent as last year in the Air Force. Avoid becoming a victim by socializing with people who share your values. That is a good one. And I brought a prop for all of you. I hope you can see this color. It's a nice hot pink. Right? This is a rape whistle. I feel very safe carrying this rape whistle around with me. But the DoD has been giving these whistles to women, not to men, but to women in uniform across the branches. Women deployed in Afghanistan today have their rape whistles, and there's nothing I can tell you that makes you feel like you belong to the unit, like a bright pink rape whistle attached to your flak jacket in Afghanistan. I mean, it's shocking, really. A lot changed last year. When Senator Gillibrand decided to take this on as a major political issue, we helped her form and write the legislation that is now considered a mainstream topic of conversation. We're trying to professionalize the military justice system. It's just as simple as that. Commanders have too much bias, take them out of the process. This was the first hearing that she hosted as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. These veterans are just remarkable, remarkable advocates. That's my wall of support from the Army. And a couple months later, with more support, more media frenzy that we placed in terms of political pressure on Republicans and Democrats, this hearing was held with the Joint Chiefs facing off with the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I testified on a panel after this, but this just says everything. If you want to know why there's so little progress in the military, this is your answer, right? What you don't see is on the wings, on the left and right wings around the senators, you see some of these faces. And this made all the difference. This has made an enormous difference. It's why our issue has come so far in the last couple of years, Republicans and Democrats alike. You know, some of these women have been trial attorneys. They've been judges. They've faced down rapists in courts, and they're not putting up with any bullshit. This is one of my favorite people, Sarah Plummer, a Marine Corps veteran who has participated in a lot of our events and trainings and summits on military sexual violence, and has become an amazing advocate herself. As many of us know, the trauma of rape or harassment doesn't end after the incident is over. You can carry that with you for years, sometimes a lifetime. And this country has silenced survivors for decades. We are not the first people to raise this issue. But with so many of us coming forward and speaking, we have elevated the voices of other folks who have suppressed their own trauma or have been told that they've been lying or that their trauma doesn't count. Ruth Moore is a Navy veteran who filed post-traumatic stress disorder benefits with the Department of Veterans Affairs and was denied. She waited 26 years to get that passed, and she is one of the faces of VA reform today. Women in the military still face an enormous amount of kind of traditional stereotyping. These women broke a lot of boundaries in Afghanistan, serving alongside the infantry, but the New York Times, in their infinite wisdom, said they expected tea, not firefights. And I can tell you, no one joins the Marines to drink tea and eat crumpets. These 4 women became our individual plaintiffs in a major lawsuit against the Department of Defense, against Secretary Hagel. They're combat veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, been there, done that, Purple Heart and Distinguished Flying Cross awards for their combat duty. And we got them together and sued the Department of Defense because we wanted to end the last vestige of legalized sex discrimination in the United States of America. These women did it, and yet there was still a blanket policy denying women access to combat assignments. A few months later, Secretary of Defense lifted that ban. Historic. It was a 20-year ban. Best selfie ever, right? Does anybody recognize this? So in the middle, you've got the photographer, Private First Class Harley Rambo Bradford, and her 3 friends. The 4 of them were the first 4 women to pass enlisted infantry training in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps opened up these schools to women. These women did the exact same tasks as their brothers in arms, but the guys were allowed to join the infantry. They were assigned to infantry units right after graduation. These 4 women, not so much. What do we do next? Where are we going from here? Right? There's a lot legislatively and agency-wise still to be done, but this is part of the problem. This is a photo of the heads of all of the major national veterans organizations, and I don't need to, ask you what they all have in common. The only 2 guys of color, are the president and General Shinseki, who heads up the VA, and both of them are not going to be around for much longer. What SWAN is doing is training the next generation of women veterans to become national security leaders, to be the ones who are talking to all of you. When you flip on the television, I want you to see them on MSNBC and Fox News, talking foreign policy, talking about military justice reform. There's a lot that needs to be done to cultivate women veterans leadership, and so we've founded a fellowship in leadership and public policy to create that next cohort, that next generation of voices. This is Colonel Martha McSally. She's running for Congress in Arizona. You might know Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. These women are incredible, but they're very few, and we want to change the face of US foreign policy and national security by training women one-on-one with these skills to do what these women are doing. Something shifts when a woman tells her story, when a woman is able to recognize and name something that's happened to so many others that has remained nameless and maybe a matter of shame or guilt. We've done that at Swan. We're still doing it. I have been healed. My healing process started with Swan. It's still a process, but I feel so much more supported by my fellow women veterans. When we started out, even women veterans weren't supportive of our work. There's so much self-hatred. There's so much internalized hatred. But I believe things are changing. I believe we're going to have a woman commander-in-chief very soon. And wouldn't it be remarkable, wouldn't it be something if the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee was a woman senator when that commander-in-chief took her post? And wouldn't it be amazing if the commander-in-chief's chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a 4-star woman admiral or general? And there are 2 4-star women generals right now in the military. Just imagine that world, right? And let's make that happen. We can do it. Thank you very much.
That was great. That was really wonderful. Elevating the voices of those who have suffered. I think we may remember that for a while. And we'll probably come back to it in the panel discussion. Thank you so much for that presentation. Our third speaker is Janet Mock. Janet is a writer, advocate, and the New York Times best-selling author of Redefining Realness. In 2012, she founded #GirlsLikeUs, a movement for trans women living visibly. Today, she travels the country discussing her experiences of living at the intersections of multiple identities. Janet is also one of our own, a board member of the Arcus Foundation, and that makes her a Philanthropy New York colleague. Please welcome Janet Mock.
Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation. I'm going to occupy this space at the podium because I'm a writer and very much attached to my words. But thank you so much. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation about the progress of girls and women. And when I first heard about the theme of this conference, as the narcissist that I am, I thought, how do I fit into this conversation? Because from my own experience, when well-meaning people say that they're talking about or advocating for or fighting on behalf of the protection of girls and women, they're often talking about a very specific girl. And it's very rare that they're talking about a girl like me. I grew up in a low-income neighborhood called Kalihi on the island of Oahu in Honolulu, Hawaii. I grew up in the middle of 5 children with a mother who was a teen mother, 2 older sisters who were teen mothers, and a father addicted to crack cocaine. I struggled, and our family struggled with our sense of homelessness and joblessness throughout my adolescence and childhood. And we struggled for resources in already communities that were ravaged by poverty. And if this wasn't enough, I also had my own identity issues, right? And I was welcomed into the world as my parents' firstborn son. I was named after my father. I was dressed in attire suited for boys. My gender was translated for me from the very beginning and expressed for me. And as a child, I struggled deeply and fought hard to not only be myself, but to reveal myself and express my femininity in a culture that demeans and devalues feminine people, in a culture that mandates that if you are born with certain genitals, you are not allowed to express who you truly are, if that expression does not align with the gendered expectations thrust upon you and your body. And despite this pervasive gender policing culture, I own my difference as a young person, and I marvel at my teenage self. That girl with the unwavering sense of self who never allowed anyone's expectations of her or perceptions of her make her question or doubt who she knew she was. And that self-assuredness was the key to my success. It enabled me to reveal myself, reveal my true self, to transition through the halls of my high school, and I became the first person in my family to go to college. the first to leave our struggling neighborhood, to move to New York City, to attend graduate school at New York University, to earn my master's degree, and to work as an editor at People magazine. And as I basked in my own success, I couldn't ignore the fact that my experience with success was completely outside the norm for girls growing up like I did. I couldn't ignore those girls because I know that they don't have the same resources that I had benefited from. And many of my sisters are grappling with homelessness, joblessness, a lack of access to healthcare and to education. And this sense of lack often pushes them out of hostile homes, out of intolerant schools that are not built for them, into detention homes and facilities, and also prisons, and deeper and further into poverty. And these interconnected issues also push them into underground economies like sex work, which is often the default method unto which trans women make the money, earn the money to support themselves, to nurture themselves with food, clothing, medicine, and shelter, basic resources that we collectively do not provide for them. And this dangerous, stigmatized work makes them all the more, or even more vulnerable to HIV. Trans women are among the most at-risk demographic, as well as the most likely to face medical discrimination. And trans women of color are even more likely to be profiled by police, to be incarcerated, and to be targets of abuse and violence. And these alarming issues often go uncharted and remain widely unaddressed because we, as a society, do not acknowledge that trans women are women, that Black and brown bodies matter, that trans girls and women of color are worthy of protection and worthy of our care. And these were the urgent issues that pushed me to step forward for the first time in my life as a young trans woman, and to use my voice to tell my story and to help tell our stories. And I've been successful. I've written a New York Times best-selling book. I've launched empowerment campaigns like #Redefining Realness and Girls Like Us, and I've been heralded even, which is ridiculous to me, as Woman of the Year, and held up as the trans girl of color who's made it. And I'm proud to be that mirror for young girls, a mirror that I frankly didn't have growing up. But we have to look beyond this mirror and look at the reality. And the reality is that the level of success that I have had is not accessible to girls growing up like I did. And when I say success, I'm not talking about the accolades. I'm talking about living freely and safely and being able to obtain shelter, healthcare, and means to support yourself. These things should not be out of reach for any girl. And we cannot celebrate success stories like mine without discussing how society made it impossible for me and how it continues to fail these trans girls and low-income women of color. And these girls, they stand at the intersection of race, class, and gender on the margins of our society. And because women are not valued, because trans people are constantly invalidated, and because people of color are exiled, trans women of color live at an intersection that I like to call pass her by and pay her no mind. We have our work cut out for us, and creating the world we want for girls and women starts with our own openness to embracing girls and women from all walks of life. We cannot only care about the ones who remind us of us, or who look like our daughters, or the ones the media consistently frames as worthy of our affection, attention, and care. And we have to care about all girls. And when I say these girls, I mean girls like Monica Jones, an activist in Phoenix, Arizona, who was wrongfully arrested because police said she looked like a sex worker. That's enough nowadays. If you're carrying condom as a trans woman of color on the streets of New York City, you can get profiled and arrested. It's real. Girls like Larry Letitia King, a gender nonconforming 8th grader who was murdered in class in 2008 because of their gender expression and their sexual orientation. Girls like Gwen Araujo, a 17-year-old who was beat and strangled to death by 4 men because she was a trans woman. Girls like Cece McDonald, who served 19 months in prison, in a men's prison, because she chose to stand her ground and she chose to fight for her life. As we know, only certain people can stand their ground and not go to jail. Girls like Elon Nettles, a 21-year-old who was beaten just blocks away from here, beaten to death in Harlem, just across the street from a police station. These girls and countless others have been beaten and jailed. They've been exiled and extinguished because they are girls and women, because they are girls and women of color, because they are girls and women of color who are trans. In the world I see and that I envision, these girls are nurtured and they are protected and they are liberated. They are included in conversations about violence against women, about HIV prevention, and about reproductive rights. They have access to women's colleges and restrooms. They have access to unbiased, knowledgeable, and affordable health care. They no longer fall in between the gaps of feminist, racial justice, and LGBT movements. They are centered, and they are centered because they mattered, and they are centered because our own liberation lies in their well-being, in their survival. So the next time you hear someone say that we're having a conversation or that they're working for the progress of girls and women, I'd love for you to ask them whether they're talking about a girl like Elon Nettles, a girl like Cece McDonald, a girl like my sisters and my friends, a girl like me. Thank you.
That was great. Terrific. Glad to take a seat. Now, if I could ask the other members, the other speakers to come out and sit down, make yourselves comfortable. Hi. First, let me just say thank you. Each one was a terrific presentation, moving and instructive and powerful, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of this audience for your comments. I told you I was going to be a low-impact moderator, and the first example of that is, although I have 100 questions, what resonated with each of you about what some of the others said here today?
I think for me it was very difficult to hear backstage.
Oh,
the microphone.
well.
But I can say that.
Then we should probably move right on to all my questions.
But I think for me what resonates is the amazing diversity even within this idea of what women of color is. And I think it's incredibly powerful that 3 women of color are on stage sharing their very diverse, different stories, how they occupy space in different parts of the world, and choose as quote unquote marginalized people to push forward issues on behalf of whole communities of other women and people. That's what resonates for me, at least the thread. Yeah.
Well, the common thread to me, among many common threads of the conversations I heard today, is that we were listening to 3 strong, articulate, tough, clear-eyed and intelligent folks who are on various missions, but very focused on those missions. We in philanthropy talk a lot and sometimes argue a lot about the concept of grit. It's that combination of patience, persistence, resilience in the face of adversity that allows people to overcome great odds and succeed great things. Whatever the definition, it's absolutely clear you've all got it. Where did it come from? Was there where does the strength to lead the fights that you lead come from in your background, in your childhood? Were there mentors? Were there people who helped you along the way? Go right ahead.
If I jump in right
Farhana.
there, in my talk I mentioned the powerful inspiration of Senator Feingold, and he certainly has been a more recent mentor to me. But I think if I were to go back and really think about what is it at the core of me, I would have to attribute it to a very strong woman in my life, and that would be my grandmother. My grandmother grew up in rural Pakistan and was pregnant with her third child when she was widowed. That third child was my father. And as is the custom in rural Pakistan, she should have probably gotten just remarried and gone on with her life. But my feisty grandmother had other plans. She wanted her 3 boys to get an education. And so she didn't remarry. And instead, she sold her jewelry, basically her wedding dowry, to pay for my father and his 2 brothers to go through school. And so she basically bucked custom, and my father became a physician and his 2 brothers became lawyers. And the first people to get a college education in my family's village. So I attribute it to my very strong-willed grandmother.
Anu, you mentioned that you joined the Marines fueled by rebellion, but you obviously have got a resource of strength that is stronger than rebellion. Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, when I talked about my mother, it's her. It's really her. I was a real shy, quiet kid when I was little. I was the shyest and the quietest. And my mother, I'd come home like crying from school and all of this kind of thing. And when I was young, and she would have none of it. She wasn't mean about it. She really wanted to help me. Kind of trained me to raise my hand and speak up for myself and be heard, and all the stuff that honestly, girls in our society today are struggling with. Basic confidence issues, even when they know twice as much as the boy sitting next to them. So that's my mom, yeah.
Janet, the experiences you went through, I can imagine crushing hundreds, thousands of others. But it didn't crush you. Where did that strength come from?
Well, I think it did crush me at times. I was definitely crushed. I think that I don't want to, just promote the hero's journey that I've made it out and ready to go. There are definitely setbacks, and I think that for me, it was this understanding, and maybe it's a bit pessimistic, but it was this understanding that no one in my life had the resources to do it for me. So I knew very early on, from probably 8 years old, that if I wanted anything in this life, even scholastic catalog books, I would have to get them myself. And so I think that using books as an example, the Scholastic's catalog you get, right? And so poor children understand that when they pass that catalog by and you can't order anything, you know not to take it home because you're going to get yelled at. But I also knew that there was a library, and so I was resourceful, and I found the library in the 6th grade, and it enabled me to fall in love with stories and imagine possibilities for myself. And I think that a lot of women writers helped me frame my sense of self, helped me develop language to discuss the things that I was going through, and I hope that a lot of my work then continues to do that same thing, to encourage other girls through giving them stories that reflect them.
Before the panel, we talked a little bit about whether each of you had been involved in kind of service programs for girls, and there didn't seem to be a great history of that. A lot of the people in this room fund programs for girls and young women. Recreation, literacy, empowerment, so on and so forth. If you were advising people who are running those programs, what would the core elements of those things be to produce young women and old women who would follow your cause and support your cause?
For me, it's an issue of mentorship for young women and girls, and older women as well. I really didn't have mentors growing up. Didn't have any in the military. Have very few today, and I think there's a real lack of resourcing there. I'm not sure why this is, but again, I feel like women and girls have a natural power inside of them that is being suppressed, it's being oppressed, and yet we meet like one another, and I feel stronger being around women like Farhana and Janet. So it's how do we foster that? I know there's some fabulous programs out there, but
is there more mentoring for women in the services now than when you were in? No? Sounds like something that would be a good idea.
Yeah, I didn't meet a woman senior to the rank of major in 5 years of service. There were very few women. Yeah, yeah.
Any other thoughts for the kind of the core elements of programs that you'd like to see for girls?
Yeah, I guess the thought that comes to my mind, Rick, is really the idea that to think about, to be willing to kind of go below the surface. So not just if your ultimate goal is empowerment of women and girls, to really maybe look at some of the barriers to the full empowerment. And unfortunately in our society, as we've all talked about, there's racism, there's sexism, there's institutional barriers, and to really not be afraid to look at those barriers and potentially invest in how to eradicate those as well.
In building your organizations, have you had any brushes with philanthropy?
Yeah.
I know one thing that yes. I realized, which would answer both the questions. Sure. It would be this idea of how do we knock down the barriers in just the application process? Because I know that there's a lot of women of color, poor women who are volunteer-based, like doing this work, but don't have resources to do a grant application. Right, and so how do we break down those barriers a bit to realize that, yes, it's great that you have all this money there, but to know that that journey to get to that money, to even to just apply to that for that money, is greater for a lot of people. And Miss Major, who's a pioneer in the LGBT movement, is a trans elder. She said that at a building ceremony named after her, a social justice building in New York City, she said, it's not enough that we have this beautiful building with all these resources for trans and queer people of color. How do we get them here? How do we realize that we need to get a bus to bring these people here for some people? And if we're really centering the most marginal in our communities, how are we taking care of them? How are we nurturing them? How are we making sure that we are very cognizant to the barriers that are going on? And that it's beyond things like just saying, oh, racism and sexism. That it's a lot, and that when it's the lived experience, these barriers are real.
Can I just add to that,
Sure,
Rick?
please. And I'm going to come back to whether you've talk to people in the philanthropic world as well.
I'm actually going to answer that.
Good.
So in our experience at Muslim Advocates, we actually, about half of our support is from primarily people within the Muslim community, individual donors, and the other half of our support has come from institutional funders, foundations, and I would say actually the very first grant that we got from a foundation was from the San Francisco Foundation. And I give big credit to a program officer who was working there at the time, Archana Sagal, who's now with Open Society Foundations. And going to Janet's point, she and her colleagues had the foresight to understand that as they were pushing out some grants to Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities, that our organizations were not as developed, had no experience with foundations, and she actually put together a series of basically learning seminars of, hey, we have this grant cycle open, here are the 3 days you can participate, and I'm going to walk you through what a grant application is, how you put a budget together, why it's important, and that was just absolutely crucial, I know, not only to our organization, but to a number of organizations. So I think there's that kind of a training that can be very, very helpful to emerging communities and organizations.
Well, I know it doesn't apply to me, but everybody in this audience hears repeatedly that they're brilliant, that all their jokes are funny, that, they do no wrong. But this is your chance to talk to a group of funders about not necessarily your own programs, but the way the funding community should look at relatively young organizations and movements like yours. The field is yours. Hanu, what do you want them to know?
Well, I think if you care about women in the United States, you should care about our work. I don't think real citizenship in the United States exists, and I don't mean actual sort of legal citizenship. I mean the idea that you belong as an American. Citizenship is tied to military service, right? And right now there are two classes of people who are not achieving full citizenship in the United States. And one is women in the military who are still not allowed to access a variety of assignments for which they were qualified, as that selfie indicated. and the other is transgender Americans. And so when you have two entire classes of people being told you're not really an American because you can't really fight for our country in the way that all those other people can, mostly straight white men who serve, and cisgender, we cannot create a society that reaches its full potential without all populations achieving their full potential. I mean, it's seminal work. It's the stuff that happens under the surface, right? We're trying to wrap our head around the idea that women are carrying loaded weapons in Afghanistan. It's a lot. It's a lot for, I would argue, a still traditional society to get beyond. But these women they're shaping history for all women in the United States and for men as well. And I would love to explore that conversation. I think it's a deep question. It's a deep conversation.
Farhana, your message for philanthropy.
My message is this. First of all, it's been tremendous to have the support of philanthropy, especially in the last 13 years. If it wasn't for philanthropy jumping in, recognizing the threats to our society post 9/11, I think we'd be in a very different state of affairs. Having said that, I think there are two challenges that I see. One is that I think there have been some funders who've thought, well, we're now 5 years after 9/11, 10 years after 9/11, that's over, that's done with, let's move on. And what's really happened is that the challenges actually have gotten tougher because the racism, the hate crimes, everything has gotten actually further embedded, unfortunately, in society, as I was discussing earlier in my presentation. So the challenges, it's almost like the challenges that were there have now been added and are part of the broader challenges we have in terms of racial justice and when it comes to human rights in our country. I would say the second challenge is that, that our work, and when I say our, not just our work at Muslim Advocates, but I know that of many of our allies, is built a lot on working closely with our allies. And it would be wonderful if funders increasingly understood that the strength of our movement is only made stronger when all of our allies have the tools and the resources to be full players at the table.
Well, let me pose the philanthropist's dilemma. On the one hand, all of the issues that you have talked about seem susceptible to progress if girls and young women are empowered and sort of on a completely broad-based, in a broad-based way, gain the confidence and the courage to make their rightful place in this society. On the other hand, there are a number of current issues, like the ones that you've spoken about, that also need attention. So how do we grapple with that idea of going with supporting programs of great breadth or supporting programs that are targeted to specific current issues? It's a problem that foundations with finite resources have to grapple with. Yeah. Any helpful thoughts?
I guess for me, it kind of comes back to a point I was making earlier, which is that I think if you want to see an advancement of women and girls' growth and their empowerment, I think we have to address some of the underlying issues. So, if you want to see growth and empowerment of girls, you also have to be able to address issues like bullying in school and girls who are being taunted because of their faith background, their ethnic background, their race background, and dealing with some of those institutional issues as well.
One of the things that each of you has in common is experience with the media. And it's not always been a pleasant experience. And yet, the media is important to getting a message out. Talk about the dance with the devil that you have gone through in dealing with some of my former colleagues in the world of the media. Janet, you've had a recent noisy encounter with Piers Morgan.
I don't speak his name, but...
but let me focus the question. Mm-hmm. As bad as that was, and just to bring everybody up to date, all he wanted to talk about was body parts. As bad as that was, the exposure for your cause was enormous in not only the first bad experience, but he brought you back a second time. So how, you want publicity for the cause,
in
but
an
it's
incredibly abusive way, I was brought back on his show, yes. Yeah. So an incredibly unsafe environment where I knew I was dealing with major power dynamics. I knew that I was being objectified as a woman of color, as a trans woman of color. And so...
so why'd you do it? Why'd you go back?
I go back because I'm a warrior, and that's what I do.
Good.
Yeah.
That's a good enough reason.
I think that in terms of media, I know it's a dance, it's a transaction, it's a performance. And so everyone's wearing makeup, everyone's, even Piers Morgan, like everyone's wearing makeup, everyone has lights on them. So you know that you're going into this space that's not necessarily built for you to be there. But I also hoped that my message would come across, that I could pivot and all of these different things. I prefer safer spaces like Melissa Harris Perry's show. We were just talking about how that has become a space for real discourse and conversation beyond just 101. I'm really talking to liberal-minded people, trying to push them on a lot of these issues. I think that for someone who's worked in the media too, I come at it with a slight advantage because I know what journalists want and the reductive nature of how a journalist's mind thinks sometimes, which is, I'm gonna do this trend piece on this hot thing right now, which I'm sure can go to philanthropists as well. I'm gonna concentrate on this hot thing right now, and then we're gonna move on to something else eventually. And so for me, how do I give them that hot thing that they wanna talk about now, which is transness, but then also unpack and talk about the diversity within the trans community and how we're dealing with a lot of varying issues as women of color within this LGBT, feminist, and racial justice movement.
Before the panel, I mentioned that I might ask about the media to Anu, and she said, "Oh, don't get me started." Oh. I'm going to get you started.
I've learned to adapt my reactions to the media. They are the single most threatening institution in my life right now. And I think that journalists and reporters are being very poorly trained today. They are under strains that previous generations of reporters were not. We enter the mediascape from a perspective of trauma. And so we have become the mama bears of telling producers to go, screw themselves. And no, you can't talk to that survivor, you can't talk to that veteran, you can't talk to our executive director. No, it's not appropriate to ask if you've been raped. It's not appropriate to ask a variety of questions. We've become kind of the defenders, the bodyguards of integrity and decency and dignity. And so if it means we don't do an interview, then we don't do a damn interview. We've learned the hard way. I mean, I've learned the hard way. You enter these places and you leave devastated. You just feel naked, like there's a hailstorm just falling on your brain.
But if you're elevating the voices of those who have suffered, doesn't the media have a role to play in doing that?
Sure they
so
do.
how do you?
They need to be schooled because they're not learning it in journalism school. That's for darn sure. I don't believe in cheap education. I don't believe that masses of Americans are learning much substance from these sensational, highly sexualized victim hero narratives. I actually do believe human beings are much smarter and more sensitive. They're a little oversaturated with information in this day and age, but I do believe that as a viewer, you do get that toxic input and impact from watching Janet being treated like dirt by Piers Morgan, or watching a sexual assault victim from the military being reduced to some crazy victimhood. I believe there's a place for civilized discussion and understanding. I really do. I've seen it, but it takes time. I'm in a very different place. Yeah, no, they need to be schooled. They really need to be schooled.
Well, Well, I think it's the humanization of the subject, right? They don't see them as a human being coming into the space, but as a subject, as a story to get ratings or to sell newspapers.
The sad truth is,
yes,
often you are put in positions of being entertainment. And that is what much of certain parts of the media focuses on today.
I don't know if this is helpful at all, but I mean, I've seen powerful directors and producers with the cameras going into the faces of survivors who are breaking down because they've been re-triggered by some memory of something. I've seen it all, and I don't believe the footage that they've gained from those encounters because they think they're precious. They think they're worthy of winning Emmys and Academy Awards. I don't believe that fundamentally it's changed the way victims in the military are perceived, because women in the military don't perceive themselves as victims. They perceive themselves as warriors who may have been victimized by a criminal or a predator, right? But that there's a huge distinction between being preyed upon, being the victim of a crime, and being a victim as your core identity. These women are powerful, they're warriors, they're veterans, and they're human beings. I think I've moved beyond the victim status and the survivor status when talking about women and men in the military. They are veterans and they're human beings. And we don't need your footage. You know, take your footage and stuff it, honestly.
Farhana, you worked on Capitol Hill. You mentioned Russ Feingold and what you learned in his office. How has that experience shaped what you're doing today?
I think in a couple of ways. Number one, I think it certainly just reinforced my faith in kind of engaging the system, and that we do have it is a democracy. It doesn't always work well sometimes, but there is a very important structure in place, whether it's a legislative process, the courts, to actually be a check on and protect our fundamental rights and freedoms. I think that is something that is critical. And also just, it's reinforced the importance in my mind of everyone really needing to play a role, to lift their voices in whatever way they can, and to be heard. Because if you're not heard, you don't count.
The bad news is that Secretary Clinton is running a few minutes late. I'm going to ask one more question. The good news is we'll have time for a couple of questions from the floor, so be thinking. Each of you talked about how difficult the challenges are, but you all saw signs of progress. I'm wondering, in a world where political polarization seems to have gone off the charts, how do you attribute the progress that you see? Where is it coming from, and how can we build on it, even in this polarized environment?
One of my favorite moments was when Senator Gillibrand was gaining more momentum for the bill. And on Twitter I saw that she had gotten support from Rand Paul and from Ted Cruz. And this was like the greatest moment in my life because I couldn't imagine any other person being able to do that. I mean, what skill does that take? And of course there's politics behind it, but seeing those two men alongside Kirsten Gillibrand and other really decent people, I mean, it was something was shifting, and that's because women are in the Senate. There's no doubt.
Yeah. I think that even though we're going through this very volatile time politically, I still have great hope and fundamentally believe that after all of this kind of turmoil that we're kind of going through, we're going to end up in a better place. I think we're going through a very difficult time in this country, and part of it, I think, frankly, has to deal with just shifting demographics. The country is going to become essentially majority-minority in the next 30 years. And so some of these, I think, some of these challenges are going to be with us for a few more decades to come. But I think in the end, I do fundamentally believe that there is something very special about the way our country was, the structures that were put in place at the founding of the country. And we just got to keep at it, keep making sure that we are staying true to those core values of who we are.
Janet, I think politically you've got demographics on your side. What else is provides a source for optimism?
A source from optimism.
For
I think
optimism.
For me, it would just be...
No, for the cause you speak
Well,
so
I think
eloquently about.
it's centering my work around the grassroots activists who are doing this work, who often are not funded, who are doing it based on, have Medicaid checks and Social Security, who are donating their time and talents and skills and wisdom to make sure that young trans people are taken care of, that they have spaces where they're validated and affirmed, where girls who have to do sex work because they have no other options or have condoms and all these things. This is grassroots work. This is, well, I guess it kind of has stuff to do with politics because everything's connected. But to me, I care more about those grassroots organizations that are caring for these people that are falling in between the cracks of many different movements. Right? We're talking about racial justice movements, we're talking about feminist movements and gendered movements, we're talking about LGBT movements, which are not addressing what's happening to low-income trans people and women of color and girls of color. And so for me, the optimism comes in the fact that we are warriors and that we make something out of nothing. And we find bright lights and that we take care of each other. And that's what community and collective liberation looks like. It's a collective process together of taking care of each other. And so that always gives me optimism.
And I'd say that in this city, there are groups and organizations helped out by some of the people in this room who have picked up the cause as well. Let me turn to the audience. It's kind of difficult for me to see with the spotlights coming down here, but somebody just helped out with the lights. Is there an urgent question in the House? I've got more. If I just thought it was fair to bring others in.
Rick, while we're waiting for
we got.
Okay.
Well, I think we asked for questions. We better take one.
Okay. That's gonna help you out.
Is this working? No.
Please identify yourself and then
I'm
ask.
Patty Weisenfeld. Patty Weisenfeld with the Simons Foundation and the Foundation for a Just Society.
A little closer to your mouth.
Thank you for those terrific conversations. Could each of you please describe the characteristics of some of the most helpful and productive relationships you have with your institutional funders?
Do you have institutional funders for Swan?
Yes, I'm thinking of a couple in particular who focus on women and on violence against women and girls in particular. Their assistance has gone so far beyond financial assistance. It has extended into my own personal leadership training, my own sustainability as a woman of color leader doing warrior work in a very hostile environment. In terms of staff training and sustainability, I mean, they think about the organization as a human being, with real living parts. And for, our organization is small, it's fierce, but it's small, right? So we need everybody. We need everybody taking care of themselves. We work with traumatized populations, and that trauma and vicarious trauma is contagious. I didn't know that starting this work. It is contagious. And so these foundations understand that and work with us to make sure that we're a whole system that is sustainable. I mean, I'm grateful, like well beyond what happens next with this work. I'm so grateful to those institutions for getting it and for getting that women of color need to be supported and elevated in their leadership.
I guess for me, there are maybe three characteristics in particular that kind of jump to mind. One is kind of meeting us where we are. As I was mentioning earlier, for my organization and a lot of organizations in this space, we're newer, more recently emerging organizations, and we may not we may not have a grant writer on staff. We may not even have anyone with a development title on our staff. And so kind of understanding where the potential grantee is and making resources available that they may not even know that they should be doing, and may end up submitting something that doesn't quite meet what you're looking for in terms of a proposal. Another factor, I think, is just the communication. Those funders that, I know oftentimes institutional funders, like the communication from the grantee about where our work is heading and where it's going, but it's also been great to have communication from the other side, especially with those institutions where things are shifting, or even if it's not actually shifting, but even just to get updates on where they are. And I would say the last piece is just that opportunity for the in-person types of visits and to come out and see the work and see the staff in action. So,
Janet, in your work with Arcus, you're now on the other side of the table. What have you learned in that brief experience on the philanthropic side?
What have I learned? I think I learned that it's a lot more complicated on that end, like who do you fund, what do you fund? I think that what I love about the Arcus Foundation and why I chose to be a board member there is because I think that they are trying to dismantle this single identity focused lens of who we fund. So they are cognizant that when they say that they're funding LGBT people, that LGBT people are vast, that a lot of them have faith issues. They also have obligations with race and class and gender and all of these things. So I like that they're a little bit more muddied in their approach to who they fund. So that's encouraging for me, the intersectionality part of that. In terms of my own personal life, I am very uncomfortable with money. So to be in this space where I'm in a power about who gets funded and where that goes, I'm happy that I don't have to make grant-making decisions, but I'm glad that I can help shift the conversation and challenge the grant-making teams there about making sure about what their blind spots are in terms of funding, who they fund.
A lot of the people in this room run into folks who are driven by a cause, hoping to found an organization. You've all either been founders or co-founders of your groups. What advice would you give for that passionate young person who is trying to start an organization to support, in this case, her cause? What?
My first would be don't do it. But then I'm now taking a breath.
Now you have to pause a minute and say why is that your first reaction?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's really interesting in the veterans community. I read a New York Times article a couple of years ago that something like 8,000 veterans organizations had been founded after 9/11. And the crux of the piece was really that this is a bad thing for the veterans community, that organizations are not, first of all, they don't have the staff that's skilled. It's sort of like people who really care, but they're not coming from the military, and so they don't know how they would serve this population. They're not the experts. There was that element, but also everybody's competing for the same funding. So who's getting served in the long run? So that's one, but the other is, going back to Farhana's point about allies, I would say to any person interested in doing good work and starting an organization, can you do it without starting an organization? Can you do it by supporting the organizations that are out there already? And I find that even in my own work, there's some people who sort of entered the fray without a real groundedness in the community or understanding what the issues are, and they complicate the space, And so I don't mean it as a sort of, a discouraging voice, but I would say, think carefully and see how you can help people in another way first. And if you can't, then okay, fine. Then we'll talk.
I think.
Farhana, what would you tell somebody who just has a passion to found an organization? Besides, don't talk to Anu.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that comes to mind, first and foremost, is to have a plan. I think probably one of the most vital things we did when we were starting Muslim Advocates is we actually went through a formal strategic planning process. A friend of mine who was an MBA and a management consultant basically donated her time to me and my friends, who were basically all a bunch of lawyers and policy people and knew nothing about strategic plans and mission statements. And we went through that hard work of being very clear about what was the void we were trying to fill, what was the marketplace already, what were the challenges we were trying to address, why we thought we were uniquely situated to do it, and then the very necessary pieces of creating the mission statement, your goals, how you're going to do it, what's your fundraising plan, what's your budget, and really kind of setting that out, and then holding yourself and your organization to it year after year.
Janet,
I've never started an organization or co-founded
well,
one, so I'm a writer. So
that what
girls
I do, like us going.
Well, that's a social media project. It costs no money, but internet access,
but that
Twitter.
May be, Janet, that may be the new
well, yeah, I believe in
progressive
hashtag
organization.
Activism.
So
yeah.
talk about that.
I think for me, it would probably be, the one thing I would tell a young girl trying to, or a young woman trying to do this work would be to ask for help and to take up the space that you feel you deserve in this world. I think just coming from that mindset, I think when you were talking a little bit, Anna was talking a little bit earlier about mentoring and looking for resources, like really looking for resources outside of philanthropy too, but looking for other women out there that can give you guidance. Maybe you have to intern somewhere else before you decide to to start your own organization. I would say to get those skills and build yourself up in that way. And I think that's for any job that you
Sure.
want. You want to make sure that you're connected to people who already have that job that you want. And so I know that that has helped me incredibly by linking up with other activist-minded women writers, has helped me do the work that I do and to be seen and heard on this level.
The mentoring piece seems absolutely critical across all of these organizations, whether it's in the young people's programs that our foundation supports, but in each one of your organizations, the ability to extract the wisdom of somebody who's been there before and can give you that encouragement seems absolutely critical. And how do you support mentoring in your organizations, or is it part of your program?
I mean, it is. We provide media trainings and advocacy training to veterans. We had a couple of national summits where hundreds of military sexual assault survivors came to Washington, and that's a lot of collective pain in one room at one time. A lot of it, we were talking earlier about, for us, the personal is political, right? There are no distinctions. So your personal story is the substance of change making in our work. So a lot of it is about cultivating support, right? If you come from a place of betrayal, then the entire point is acknowledging that you were betrayed, and then healing can start.
Well, I'm happy to point out that this panel's healing can start because we're just about to wrap up. But I want to thank each of you for your thoughtful and thought-provoking and moving comments. I think, yeah. I think the wrap-up thought is that we've heard from three terrific people who, with intelligence and compassion and passion, are doing great things. And we look forward to watching you do more great things. Thank you very much. That was great. Thank you. Thank you.